Welcome to Strictly From Nowhere, a podcast for tech founders by tech founders. Each episode explores the trials, tribulations, successes, and some comedy as we follow innovators and their journey from zero to market. Karl, welcome to Strictly From Nowhere. It's a pleasure to have you on the call. I'm so excited to hear about your story, and the journey of how you found Cause of a Kind and how we helped you to really get where you're going. As always, folks, we have Karl Runft here from HouseCrunch, and Karl comes with us today as, we'll say a recent graduate of the Cause of a Kind startup studio. And we have Karl on the show today to give us a little bit of an overview of his history and how he identified such a problem and why it was worth it to kind of go down this road. So Karl, thanks for being here for today. And I'm super excited to jump into your story.
Yeah, sounds good.
Great, man. So tell me about yourself. What makes you uniquely you? And can you tell me a bit about your background, your hobbies, and your general human experience that's gotten you to where you're at today?
Yeah, well, I mean, I would say this. I mean, I've always sort of, I guess, been someone who's always come at most of my life with a bit of a skeptical view. I don't know, a view that, one should always try to find out how things work before you just give into it. And, I guess that parlays into HouseCrunch just to the extent that, you practice law and you could really just go along with, whatever the legal field you're in and accept sort of its premises and just grind along. But as I say, I've always had a sort of an itch to say, well, okay, fine, we can do it this way, but why are we doing it this way? And is there a better way to do it? And are there problems which are making the way we're doing it, inefficient or problematic or unjust? And I guess that's always been somewhat of my attitude to my life in general, for good and for bad, is, growing up and being somewhat of a bit of a, I don't want to say contrarian, but someone who's, at least willing to say no to the rules, I guess, which, when I was a kid wasn't always the best thing to get along with, school teachers and stuff. Although you got to know what your limits are. You can't just, run into machine gun fire constantly. But I would say if any personal quality I had that, I don't even know where it comes from, just ingrained. That's what I would say would be something, as always throughout my life, I've always been somewhat of a willing to at least ask questions as to why are we doing it the way we're doing it. And so that would say be the impersonal quality that kind of has brought me to HouseCrunch and where I am now. So, and I'd say, just on the downside, part of that is I guess not being a total joiner and everything comes with costs, because you end up, bucking the system and the system bucks back, and you find out, well, I start asking questions, and then the system says, well, you're asking questions, you're not going to advance any further. So there's been some of that in my life over time. So,
well, it makes sense. You're definitely explaining a series of characteristics that are probably pretty important for the general founder, general entrepreneur, but that wasn't always your path. So tell me a little bit about your historical career path, and how did you choose that when you were
well, yeah, I'd say ironically, I chose a very conventional, career trajectory. Right. I went through high school, University of Chicago, then law school, and then practiced law for almost 20 years now. Hard to believe. So yeah, I've had, at least on paper, a pretty conventional career path. Well, I shouldn't say that. When I graduated law school, I ended up, I had an opportunity to work in a large law firm in Chicago. And instead, I ended up moving back to Idaho and practiced law with my dad for several years. Well, it was sort of an interesting situation. I was a clerk at the Idaho Supreme Court, and my plan was to move to the West Coast. But long story short, I ended up working with him on some very interesting cases for a couple of years. And then I eventually did move to the West Coast with my then girlfriend, now wife, landing in the Bay Area. So yeah, it hasn't been I guess in that metric, it hasn't been a conventional legal career. I kind of started over when I was 6-7 years into my law practice here in the Bay Area. And Yeah, sort of just took what I could and found my way into a real estate law, which is the sort of intersect with HouseCrunch website. I was really practiced. My legal career was more focused on sort of a hodgepodge of election law, constitutional law stuff, and also some personal injury stuff, kind of an interesting hodgepodge. But when I moved to the Bay Area, I ended up just by circumstance really getting more and more into real estate law now over the last, I'd say, 7-8 years, which has really been an exclusive area of my legal practice. So I guess in that sense, yeah. So my instead of following some sort of straight line trajectory right out of law school, I ended up really zigzagging and landing in an area of law that was really the launch pad for going into HouseCrunch. So
it's so interesting. And if I may, I also happen to know, definitely from left field, but I happen to know you're also an author and you've published a book. And where did that fit into the whole timeline?
Yeah, so it was really like 10 years ago, I think, maybe more. Oh my God, hard to believe. Yeah. It was before my first kid was born, when I had time to do this kind of thing. I did write a novel. That was kind of an itch I always had since college, sort of a sophomoric desire to make your statement. Put your your thoughts and your ideas into some sort of book that everybody can read, and you're gonna plant your flag.
It's on my list.
Ideological flag out there. It's funny. I looked back at it recently, just in kind of connection with HouseCrunch, just thinking, oh my God, this thing is out there. I looked at it. It was worth a laugh. It definitely was a first time effort. But I always tell myself, well, you know what, you did something that most people say they're going to do, and they never actually get around to doing it. So
that's right.
I guess that's what I can take solace in.
For the folks, what's the title and where can folks find it? Because I'm sure people are going to be interested.
Yeah, it's called The Rum and the Fury. It's on Amazon. I think I have to. It's available in hardback, and it should be available online. I think I need to re-up that online, but I'll do that shortly. But it is available, so.
It's very cool. Well, it's definitely on my bucket list. I know it's on Mike's bucket list. We've got tons of stories from just building this business that would just make for a really cool business book. So I might tap into you one day about where should I get started and how does that all work. But pretty cool. It's definitely on my list.
I got to say, people. This is my only piece of advice. If people, this is fiction. I mean, nonfiction. I think probably is a different world. But nonfiction or fiction writing, at least from my own personal experience, is that I think you just have to have it all in your head already set out. Like a lot of people, I think, get stymied because they have an idea, a nucleus of a story, and then they think this is going to be the springboard to finish the whole thing out. That may work for like Stephen King, because I think he said that's how he writes his books, that he just sort of has an idea and just runs with it. But of course, he's a professional writer for all his life. And so my only recommendation is, if you're not a professional writer and you want to write a fiction novel, is to sit down and just, at least as much as you can, think from A to all the way to Z, as much as you can. So,
it's so funny. It relates so deeply to building a piece of software and building a piece of technology. And it's really interesting, right? Like lots of people have a basic idea, basic good idea, could even be an improvement on an existing piece of technology, could be a gap in a marketplace, but you really have to kind of bake out what the whole idea is going to be, and like what's the goal and how does it add value. And if you build something, it requires nourishment. It requires a constant lifelong journey, God be willing, right? Like as long as it's going to survive and do well, like it's kind of like raising a kid. It's kind of like starting and completing a book. It's one thing to start, leave it on the shelf and collect dust. It's another thing to get to your conclusion and have done so in a great way. And I find it interesting as you tell me a little bit about your story. It's no wonder you kind of went down the route of founder and potentially entrepreneurship and building something that fills a void that was in your industry, and you really embody the type of founder story that like Mike and I just fall in love with. It's like why we built the startup studio in the first place. And your career as an attorney in real estate presented a gap in the industry, a gap in technology that wasn't filled, and you adapted to the gap for your career until you decided to do something about it. And that's like the origin of HouseCrunch. And I think what's cool about it is it fills a massive gap, and it gamifies the experience of home ownership and real estate and and record keeping and all of these things that you've done in your past, it's no wonder you found your way to building something and seeing it through. And I'd like to start a conversation a little bit more focused just about HouseCrunch, and tell me a little bit about how your career presented a gap that was so obvious to you, so let's call it painful, that it was worth going down the path of trying to fill the gap.
Pain is a good word, because the nucleus of the idea, really, as I say, the last 7 years, I sort of found myself falling is the right word, moving more into real estate litigation. And one area of real estate litigation, the firm I work for, we ended up doing a lot of work in is buyer-seller litigation. The basic setup being, you buy a house, you find out the seller misrepresented the condition of the house and should have disclosed the issues, and therefore the buyer sells the seller in an attempt to get some sort of compensation for the undisclosed problems with the house. This is a classic problem. It is timeless. We go back to ancient England. Common law. This is as old as the hills, right? This buyer-seller disputes about buying real estate. Anyway, so you get into this, especially with residential properties here in the Bay Area. And I have to say, I always tell people, 90% of the cases we handle are just losses. I mean, the buyer will sue, the seller will, make up excuses. They'll end up paying the attorneys a bunch of money. And at the end of the day, maybe some money changes hands, but at the end of the day, nobody's really compensated. The attorneys are the only ones who end up making any money. And I was like, God, this just sucks. You end up fighting, fighting the court case, and yet at the end of the day, no broader justice is served. Basically, it's a net social loss. The buyer ended up spending more money on attorneys than they got in compensation. The seller did the same thing. They ended up losing a bunch of money paying us. I thought, what if there's a way? What's wrong with the process here? Why is this happening? Why are these problems in the sale that, granted, as I say, 90% of the cases probably aren't worth suing over, because what people are complaining about are not big enough problems to warrant the litigation. 10% of the time, okay. The problem with the house is so huge, you got to go for it. You got to try to claw back the sale. But 90% of the time, it's not worth it. And but people still sue. They still go through the motion of just blowing up the thing. And I thought, what if there was a way to at least push back against that? Why is this happening? And then you investigate the industry, and as a litigator, I'm knee deep in it. I see the whole dirty underside, the contracts, the way the sale is done. I get the whole underbelly, A to Z transactional picture. I know exactly what happened, who said who did what when, and I can see how, right where things started to go wrong, where somebody just didn't quite tell the truth or fudged, or something wasn't done, and then you can see that's where the ball starts rolling, and people, the whole thing's going to collapse. And so I thought, well, so why is this happening? And I think one of the reasons, probably the reason, a lot of deals go bad, a lot of residential real estate deals go bad, is because of essentially an asymmetry of information, that the seller and his real estate agent control the flow of information to the buyer. And this is, again, timeless problem. This is old as the hills. The seller knows what the property's like. They've lived there. They know the secrets. They don't want to let them all out, because if they do, that'll impact the price. Now, which results in California, especially, as sort of a dance where there's certain disclosure laws which require the seller to make certain disclosures and blah, blah, blah. And the buyer can take that under advisement, and the buyer has some duties to do inspections and so on. This sort of dance, but the seller is still in a position of great power, of tremendous power to make disclosures, and this is magnified over the years, at least especially recently been magnified by the fact that most people, at least initially, start their home search online. So most houses are presented in Zillow and Redfin and Trulia and these online websites. It's all just seller-based information. So again, you go to a house and it's all pumped up. My favorite example is the real estate agent photos of houses online. You go there, you look at these photos of these houses, like, oh my God, this house looks great. This room looks really big. Oh, this is
Beautiful.
like the third. My favorite is the third bedroom, right? The third bedroom, and otherwise it's a 2-bedroom bungalow with 1 bath. But no, there's a third bedroom, and you see these pictures. You're like, oh, this is great. Then you actually go in person. You're like, oh my God, this is a closet. Somebody took a closet and modded it into a bed. This is not a third bedroom. It's a pool. Wow. Anyway, long story short, so I see, the transactions that go bad. I wonder why this happens, and I realize that it's just the fact that there is a definite hand on the scales in favor of sellers to push properties and to distort the reality of what is actually being bought by the buyers. And this is magnified by the internet, in which there's no interaction on any of these websites for buyers to come online and say, hey, wait a minute, I saw this property. I saw it. I was there. And what they're putting on here on this website is not accurate. And I thought, but you could actually expand that, not only just to, potential buyers going to these properties and then being able to go on there and directly comment on a listing. You could expand that to get historical knowledge beyond it. Let people in the neighborhood come on there too and be like, hey, wait a minute. 2 years ago, the seller clearly did unpermitted work, which is, again, one of the classic failure to disclose issues. Somebody will buy a house, and then the local city or county person will come by and be like, oh yeah, all these walls apparently were put in there without proper permits. And the buyer's like, what? And they're like, yeah, sorry, you're gonna have to do like $20,000 or $20,000, geez, you're gonna do $50,000 of repairs. Right. Anyway, so long story short, I thought, boy, if there was a neutral information clearinghouse for residential real estate where somebody could go to find third-party information, not provided by the seller, third-party information that at least, is it reliable? But at least we could put people on the right track. You could find a place you could go to get some ideas about what is the true value of this property. Is there third-party information I can get up front before I, actually put an offer on the property or engage with the seller and do as I say, this dance that takes place between a buyer and seller, where the buyer will say, okay, I'm willing to buy your property, but I want to, you have to make disclosures to me, and I want to conduct inspections. What if you could go to a website where there's information already on the decks that you could look at before you even have to get to that point, where you can make a more educated assessment as to whether you're interested in this property or not? Because as I state, all the online real estate websites that I know of, that I've seen, do not allow any third-party input at all. I think Trulia strangely had an ability to comment on properties, but the exclusions of what you could say were so broad, I don't even think it was going to be useful. I think the exclusion, in fact, said, the terms of service said, yeah, you can comment on general aspects of the neighborhood, which was about it. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's gone now. I should probably check, but I bet they probably nuked that after a couple of weeks. But anyway, the point being is that it became clear to me that there would be there is lacking in the ecosystem of residential real estate a tool that could be very useful to buyers, by which, again, you could make an attempt to engage in some sort of independent investigation upfront about real estate that has, input from all various sources, not only other buyers who are interested in the property who may have seen it, but again, neighbors, also archival information, if people would upload, documents that they know would be useful or relevant to the home, such as maybe an inspection report that they saw or got their hands on. What a valuable tool this could be for prospective home buyers to push back against a seller-dominated market. Particularly in the last couple of years. It was a seller-dominated market from 2018 to at least last year. Things are a little bit flux now, but how great that would be. And I don't have any illusions. I don't think such a website would be the end all of real estate, but it would be a very valuable tool. And a place where you could really do a lot of fun things too. Like, one of the aspects of the website is the crunch price, which is the idea that people could come in, look at a property, see what it's being offered for according to the seller, and then say, maybe not, and then put their own price up there and say, this is what I think it's worth. And then people can look at that as a community rating to say, well, 50 people came on here and the aggregate price that they think it's worth is less than what the seller is putting up there, which could be a red flag to any potential buyer. Think, maybe I got to be more cautious about what I do. Because as I say, in a hot seller market, people are just putting bids out there 20, 30, 40% over asking right out of the gate. And you're just like, oh my God. What if, there's got to be some sort of way to push back against that to get some better idea of what you're putting your money down on instead of just like falling over yourself to buy a property. So
HouseCrunch has turned into like such a simple but elegant solution for this, because you really are not discriminating on the type of individual, whether it's a buyer or a seller, whether it's an appraiser, whether it's an attorney, whether it's an agent. This is really designed for the transfer of information. And I think that has always been true, is transparency, the true nature of disclosure, the really on the side of protecting the buyer, but also allowing the homeowner to feel a level of transparency and feel a level of pride in the property that they maintain. And not everything is a capital improvement. Like, not everything is going to be recorded with a permit and an insurance assessment, but there are emotional things that people do to their dwelling that other people find to be emotionally empowering as well. It could be things that normally you'd gift. Maybe there's a shed that you're proud of in the backyard, or a hot tub that like you didn't get zoning for, but could just be a gift during the transfer. The ability to keep track of these various enhancements to the dwelling over a period of time, whether it's disclosure from a neighbor, or whether it's the homeowner, or whether it's a series of prospective buyers that come to the house and just out of bluff. Karl, I want to kind of pivot a little bit and get into the beginning of our partnership, because I know you had a previous experience trying to build HouseCrunch, release HouseCrunch, maybe some years prior, but through a referral, I don't even remember who at this point, some time ago already, you were introduced to Mike and I think we had some original calls to kind of understand a little bit of what your vision was for HouseCrunch, but I'm sure you did your due diligence. I'm sure we weren't the only ones that were in the hopper. What stood out to you about me, about Mike, about Cause of a Kind, and like trusting an individual or an agency, with the budget that you had, with the time that you have, with the vision that you had, is not an easy thing to commit to. So I'm interested, just, remember, for the general founder that's just thinking about pursuing their journey, like what would be Karl's checklist or playbook for selecting a partner to entrust your vision to?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, just to start out, I'd say, I came to this with zero, well, not zero, but pretty close to zero technical background on building websites. So I was at a very much a disadvantage in terms of knowing who to choose, how to choose, or even what I needed. And as you said, I did have a prior developer work, well, actually two prior developers, one which ended up ghosting me, which was a bad experience. The other one was it was a different situation. Long story short, I came to the realization that what I really needed was somebody building a website, right? If this is my advice to people in my position of no technical background, I would say knowing exactly what you wanted, which was just to build the website and not any other bells and whistles, just the construction, right? I wanted a construction crew, somebody who could build it, not anything more or nothing less. That's what I wanted. And basically, already having two sort of experiences that one didn't work out, one was just sort of a half workout. I did have some experience in kind of the lingo and understanding some of what the universe of development was from those experiences. And so then I really buckled down and did a little research on what kind of firms out there are the kind of firms that would meet my needs. And yeah, you're right. I don't recall exactly how I came to Cause of a Kind, but it was through a chain of recommendations, which I really just pressed. I contacted people and I was like, this is what I want. Just a paragraph. This is it. I don't want anything else. This is it. And I insisted on that. And that really did get me to somebody who just said, look, here's who you want. And they gave me like 3 names. And frankly, I'll tell you guys this, you were probably the most responsive. It was frankly your guys' personal people handling that really won me over because, in every walk of life, that if you respond and are positive, people will react, and then they'll follow through, which is what you guys did. You guys immediately contacted me back. You understood my issues, and that was really the only way to go as far as I was concerned. And because I'd already drilled down to the point where I knew you guys would offer what I wanted, it was really just a choice of who amongst like 3 choices, and it was just because you guys, again, I even think you guys had some solutions that had eluded me in the past regarding the architecture, which was impressive, because I think some outfits, they're like, well, we would have to look into how we'd set this up, etc. Whereas you guys, I think, responded immediately with answers to questions that I was probably going to ask at some point, but given you guys sort of upfronted it, I was like, all right, we're already 30% down the road. This is great. I don't have to go walk through the whole, well, how are we going to do this? And then what are the actual, scaffolding that we need to build? You guys were already, down that road quite a bit, which was very refreshing, because as I say, the first badish experience I had, that was one of the problems, is that they didn't know how to actually get the thing off the ground, technically speaking, on some of the technical aspects. Whereas it was so refreshing that you guys are basically already there. You guys are like, oh yeah, this is how we can do it. We have the data bases. We can set all that up. That's it. And I was like, all right, that's great. So yeah, that was that was the 2 things. You guys responded immediately, and 2, you guys were already had solutions to the problems that I hadn't even broached yet to you guys. So that was a real confidence builder from my end.
Yeah, it plays directly into our general ethos of the startup studio, which is zero to market. That's our jam. I'd have a hard time staking my claim on that if I didn't already have solutions to problems as they enter into my inbox. It's so funny. Mike and I chatter all day, as I'm sure you can imagine. And when folks come to us with various business problems, we're already riffing on what solutions are. It's always the tolerance of the founder. How minimal do you want to go? Our whole game is, what is the minimum piece of software that you could put out into the world, because you got to maintain that minimum piece. The bigger the car, the bigger the gas bill. Mm-hmm. So the whole idea for us is that zero to market, and we just solutions riff along the way. And I think you kind of saw that, from the start. And I'm happy you went there, because now you have an MVP. Now you're in the marketplace. You went zero to market, and I'm interested to hear a little bit about, what are some of the short-term pursuits, and, what are some of the steps that you're kind of taking now that you have a fully functional product here, and what is it like to be in charge of, this infant and nurture it and watch it grow, and it's always an amazing but daunting part. And I think, again, for the benefit of founders or future founders that are listening to it, what is it like to be responsible for a piece of software, and how are you, hopefully non-emotionally managing the next steps of this business?
Yeah, so I mean, we do have an MVP. It's a little bit of a minimum product, I guess, is the way to best describe it. It doesn't have a lot of bells and whistles that eventually, hopefully, it will get. Yeah, I mean, I'm excited, and a little, part of me is just worried. Am I doing enough to push this forward? Because I still have a full-time job practicing law, so that is a concern. Is how much time can I dedicate to this to push this forward? So it is a concern. Right now, I think the idea and pushing it forward is just to get it's in two tracks really. Is to one get as much exposure to the product as possible by people who are interested in real estate, and 2, to try to reach out to more institutional players who might be either interested in becoming partners or investors in the product. So that's sort of the 2-track I'm aiming to do. How I plan to do that. One is I'm going to try. I'm trying to develop sort of an integrated system where I will go through recent house listings and just myself make a post on it and get it out there, just so that the site just starts building up a little bit of exposure on that front. Because I think the main challenge of the site, and this is something I've talked with people ad nauseum and very well aware of it, it is the one major hurdle is like, how am I going to drive people to use a site that requires them to do a little bit of work? So, you know, that is the big obstacle, right? Are people going to be willing to come to the site and actually put a star rating on a house, etc.? And how many people are out there who are willing to do it? And that's the great experiment. We're going to find out. I mean, are people really going to be interested in doing this kind of thing? Maybe they are, maybe they're not. Maybe I'm going down a dark alley. We'll find out. That's the key. So anyway, what I'm starting to do is to build up a presence on all major platforms. And my short-term goal is to just start plugging away and start just myself starting to rate houses, get some ratings out there, try to get some attention just on that front. And so that hopefully draw more and more people into visiting the site and maybe making some inputs and just hopefully build up some exposure that way. And then the other exposure that we talked about was using LinkedIn as a platform to reach out to more institutional players who can magnify the presence of the site.
Yeah.
I haven't really gotten into that quite yet. I've just been, as I say, I have dual loyalties between my day job and the website. Which has been a little bit of an obstacle, but things are looking up. I've overcome some hurdles on that front. So that's the short-term plan. Get it out there. Just start getting houses rated so that hopefully people who are looking at houses start noticing that site's out there. And then at the same time, getting some more institutional players who are interested in, you know, real estate to talk to them and maybe get some interest, maybe get some, I don't want to say partnerships necessarily, but just some backing from, you know, other people in the industry who would say, hey, this looks like an interesting product. I'm going to tell some more people about it.
So interestingly enough, as you know, as we've always said, we try to relate right back to like our personal dealings. And of course, I'm a homeowner. Mike is a homeowner. I immediately utilized HouseCrunch. Like, yes, of course, as we build it, and like we had to pick a property to use as our guinea pig. But what was so fun for me is I'm going back and I'm like racking my brain of all the things that like you normally maybe not going to classify in your history of home ownership. You know, a couple of years ago, a major thing that happened to my home, and right around, like it was something that was not disclosed, was I had a HVAC system, comprehensive multi-floor HVAC system, that was on its last legs when I bought this home. So I didn't even make it one full summer before I had to replace an entire HVAC system. So, okay, I mean, maybe I should have did something on the legal side about all of that, but I immediately was like, that's a major enhancement that like I definitely would want to demonstrate transparently about the history of the home.
Sure.
You know, there's been I live in an HOA community. So the exterior of my home may not be something that is just transactionally transparent if I go to sell this house in the future. There's been upgrades around the property that are not necessarily by me, but they impact the value of my home. They impact the aesthetic experience of my home. So for me, this gamified historical log of the things that I find to be valuable about my home, like when I laid down the carpeting, I redid a bathroom, we had windows changed. Like some of these things might not be considered to be general capital improvements. They don't require inspections. They could be quote unquote off the books or whatever, but they truly do connect me deeper with my home, and it offers the opportunity for true transparency of the good things, the bad things, the general experience in the community. And as you know, I've talked to a lot of real estate agents specifically. I don't know why, but I happen to have a nice little network of friends that are all in the real estate experience in one capacity or another. And for them, this adds such a layer of engagement between the agent and the seller, for example. Mm-hmm. The agent is imploring the seller to utilize HouseCrunch so they don't have any problems at the signature table. And like, I find that to be a very interesting, you know, it's not even the attorneys that are going to tell people to go and do that. It's the agent. The agent wants to close with as little friction as possible. And I find it so funny because the agent's not going to go and populate this information. The agent is going to tell the homeowner trying to sell their home, the more complete that you can fill this, the less problems we're going to have in 90 days when we get to the closing table. So for me, I'm so interested in the potential of this platform because, again, it's agnostic. It speaks to all the different personas within the real estate experience, and it returns the power of home ownership to the homeowner. Like, I truly am responsible for the things that are happening in this house.
Yeah.
So yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say that's an aspect of the site that doesn't really come out yet, just because, again, it's in an MVP mode, is to bring out more abilities of this. Because right now, most of the stuff that we're talking about is empowering buyers to sort of be more informed about purchases. But you're right, the sort of flipped dual side of this, the mirror image, is for sellers to use the site proactively to get ahead of any issues. And one of the things I think would be a huge feature down the line if this takes off is for sellers in maybe in conjunction with agents to purchase priority space in a site like this. Not just out of a cynical, like, oh, we're going to sell space just to hijack these people, make them pay to put their, no, so that, if you go to a property, you can see, sure, there's third-party people saying what they're saying about this property, some of it good, maybe some of it bad, but then you also have the perspective of the seller who could put their own information. And as one thing you hit on in this conversation, which I hadn't quite, maybe intuitively understood, but you really nailed it, was that there's a lot of aspects of a home that never come out in the actual real estate transaction process from the seller side that you think you'd want to know about, right? That the seller can say, we love this house and we did this, and we really feel the value here and there because of the things we did. A little bit of that comes out in a real estate transaction, but not much. The real estate agent, for the seller can say, oh, this family lived here and it was so great and blah blah blah, and you're like, oh yeah, you're just saying that. Whereas if you can see in the seller's own words in a direct format the value they have on it, maybe some of the emotional attachments, it could have great value to potential buyers. So anyway, The point is that as you were just saying, I think there is real value from a seller perspective as well, not just a cynical, like, oh, this site is going to, be the tool of buyers to tear down houses. No, there would be some of that for sure. If you feel there's a lemon out there, if somebody's trying to put a property on the market, which is clearly, fraudulent. But at the same token, if there really is a special place that whose value could be augmented by some sort of direct input from the seller in a priority contact format, beautiful. People would value that. So
value that, and like I remember, I bought my home when I was a little bit younger. I had just enough money to buy this thing and stop renting, and like that was the goal. I had no money to renovate. I had no money to really put into the house, and I was trying to find a house that was going to last me a little while before I could go and take care of it. Things like, what are the ages of appliances? Things like, what's the condition of the carpet and how long ago was that replaced? Things like blinds, things like molding. These are like cosmetic stuff that doesn't really have a place in the buyer seller journey yet. But for me, that was actually something that I emotionally considered on day one. Am I going to have to go and spend $5,000 to replace carpeting comprehensively, or is it good enough for now? It was just replaced, 3 years ago, and there were no animals in the house. Things like this are part of the experience that I, as a user of the HouseCrunch platform, took seriously. I'm I have a list of 30 or 40 things. I've only been in this house for 6 years. It's I really went deep of what are the things that I have done to enhance the value of my own property.
Right. And we hopefully, as this thing matures, a lot of those tracking features can be included in a, sort of a one button system where you can really just say new client, boom, just touch the button and it records the date, and you can have that as again, an archival history of that kind of information. So yeah.
There's definitely a feature future. I like to
say.
Future
With
for
this,
HouseCrunch.
what's out there now is a very, very basic review kind of site. Yeah. So,
and you did it in the MVP model. You did it in if we're gonna fail, let's fail fast, and let's fail with the least exposure that we possibly can. And that's a great way to set yourself up for a successful future. Because
Right.
you got to be able to find interest in this minimum product. Everything else is just going to be an enhancement to that user experience.
Right. The two features, which are going to be the ground features, are the rating system and the crunch price. If there's anything that's going to draw people in, I think it would be those two things, because anything else is going to be more of an add-on that's going to require more of a presence. So yeah, if people are interested in rating houses, this will be allow them to do so if there's interest in it. So
yeah, it's dynamite. Well, I have to ask, you're balancing a lot of stuff. We talked about moonlighting in comparison to your full-time career and what pays the bills around the house. And not such a, not a small endeavor of a career, being an attorney and having a client list and, doing all those things is definitely time consuming, but you also have a family. You're also a distinguished member of your community. Like, how do you find the balance? And like, what does the family think about the pursuits of HouseCrunch and like Karl becoming a founder, after having done a career for 25 years?
Yeah, well, I think my wife just sort of doesn't ask a lot of questions yet. She sort of just, tell me when it's making money. I think it's her
Make
perspective.
It work.
So,
mine's the same.
Yeah, as for time, I mean, yeah, that's totally the total. I mean, you could put so much time. I mean, I could spend all day, on this thing, just doing things and making it happen. So basically, what I have to do is just block an hour, 2 hours to do stuff. And sometimes maybe you end up not doing anything super productive, but you just get on your platform, do stuff. And that's basically my basic philosophy is, with the trap you can get into is to say, oh, I'm going to do all this stuff. I have a plan and it's all going to come together. And then you're just like, I have no time to do that. And you just say, look, just spend an hour, do what you can, set minor, that's how I call micro goals. Just say, okay, you have 1 hour. Here's 2 things you got to do. And what always surprises me is like how much time it actually takes to do those 2 things. You think, oh, I just want to register this or whatever, or post something. That should be like 10 minutes. So you get on there and suddenly you realize, no, actually it takes me 45 minutes just to get it right. I'm always, it's the thing in this project, because, if you're practicing law for 20 years, things can come quite quickly too. You can really move things along, because you've done it. It's rote. So something like this for me is not rote. I have to take a step back and just acknowledge, like, look, doing this one small task you think should take 5 minutes is not going to take 5 minutes, but just set micro tasks, just keep moving the ball forward slowly but surely. So that's basically it. That's basically how I'm operating these days. So
yeah, it's reminiscent of like, we moonlit, or publicly known about Cause of a Kind. Mike and I moonlit this business for 5 years before like we were in a position of like security, of general commitment. COVID helped shutting the whole world down and like killing my professional travel schedule, and like, compartmentalizing and finding those micro goals as you define them. That allowed us to make many cuts over a long period of time towards the direction of an ultimate goal. And like, I don't know what the timetable is for anybody else's project, but for ours, we followed a very similar model to what you're talking about. It's whatever time that you have available, daily basis, a couple times a week, you're always moving towards the ultimate goal. And in this case, it's to really kind of see this piece of software to the light of day. It's in the market, but it's the old, tree fell in the woods. Did anybody hear it? And what we really want to do is really try and get as much exposure and as much of a test to try and figure out like what's the next step. And I think that brings me to one of my last questions I think that I have for you, which is, what is the next hope and step for HouseCrunch? And ultimately, what does Karl want to be known for? And we were having a laugh about it before, but in a Peter Pan mindset, like, what does Karl want to be when Karl grows up, and what do we see for ourselves over the next 5 to 10 years? Yeah, well,
if HouseCrunch were to take off and become supplant my legal career, then that'd be something I'd let it do if it was capable of doing that. I wouldn't mind that at all. In fact, that would be a nice exit point. I guess the thing about the law is that people practice till they're like 80 something. They can, and then that's, some people love it. That's fine.
Yeah.
And I don't really see myself doing that, although God forbid, who knows. So if HouseCrunch were to become sort of the exit from I practiced law for 20 years. It's not like I was desperate to get out, but it would be nice if it did become something, then if it became a way to sort of the next career step, that'd be pretty amazing. I'd be pretty excited about that. And as I've always said from the beginning, if it became successful but didn't make me rich or whatever, that'd be fine. I mean, if it became a way to reorient a portion of the real estate market to the benefit of consumers generally, that would be quite a mark, to make, to say like, look, there was an idea, I ran with it, and it actually did result in the betterment of an industry that was not serving the broader public that well. That would be, definitely something to be proud of, and to say there was a point to all this. So that would definitely be great. And God forbid, if it actually became super successful, and whatever, it's sold or whatever. As you say, as I was telling you earlier, what would I do if I grew up? I could actually see myself going back to doing some writing. That would be something I might be interested in doing. Historical fiction. That was something I thought would be the next logical step from the first book I wrote, would be to get into historical fiction. So we shall see.
I was just going to ask you. You kind of answered it already, but I'll give you one more snap at it. I'm a person of abundance and of abundant mindset, and bit of a dreamer, a grandiose personality, and people might call me a little extra, hence my microphone. what is Karl's grandiose goal? It could be about HouseCrunch. You just said kind of pursuing the origins of authorship, but nobody's listening. Open the kimono. What is the ultimate grandiose goal?
Like the fringes of my mind kind of goal, like totally out there.
Yeah, man. Like, do you want to climb Everest? Like, what's
I have to tell you, this is a semi joke I made to my wife. So I'm from Boise, Idaho, right?
Yeah. Yes.
So outside of this is a fantasy / joke, but God, if I actually could do it, maybe I would. There's this giant plateau above the city of Boise, which has a giant religious cross on it that lights up at night. That's always been controversial. Anyway, long story short, it's on a large plateau, and I always thought it'd be hilarious. It'll say, for whatever reason, I became immensely wealthy and I could do whatever I want. There's actually a giant chunk of private property on the back end of it, and I always thought, I'm going to buy that back end of that plateau above the city and build like a facsimile, a replica of like the Acropolis or something like that, like a giant, just huge, like Roman Greek temple. Yeah. Just sort of a counterpoint to, I'm not trying to be against the cross or anything, but I thought, like, if they got the cross out there, I'm going to put the Acropolis, like some giant, like, Zeus or something.
Oh, it's too funny.
Anyway,
that's exactly what I was hoping for with that question.
That would be like my life, like that would be like life's testament, like a giant, like, because if you've ever been to Boise, it's hard to explain, but this like plateau I'm explaining, it dominates the city. It sits like right above it, and most of it's a park, which is great. It's a public area, people hike to it, but part of it is this private. It's a quarry actually, and I think it's private property. Anyway, long story short, I think it'd be pretty bewildering and awesome to like build this huge, like, out of place, like, temple. I think people would hate it at first, but this is just a blight on our community. But then, like, 20 years after I'm dead, they'd be like, this is a tremendous tourist attraction, like,
Oh man, I hope it for you. That's
right.
Well, last but certainly not least, where can folks find you? How can they get into HouseCrunch? And what do you got going on that's like truly important to you, from special projects to initiatives to adventures that you're super proud of, that you'd like to have synonymous with the HouseCrunch name?
Well, so right now, if people want to get in touch with me, just go to housecrunch.com. There's a contact email on that. Also, it's on Twitter. You can just DM the site directly on Twitter. Right now, I'm the one running everything, so I will be responding to any question, any inputs. I'm also on Facebook and then also on LinkedIn. My personal account is linked into the HouseCrunch account, so you could just parlay over there if you want to get in touch with me. So as for the second parts, I don't know what exactly. mean, right now I'm just again focusing on getting exposure to the site, and hopefully getting that thing off the ground. So,
well, we're certainly invested in the success of it as well. And Karl, not only thanks for joining me on an episode of Strictly from Nowhere, but it has been one heck of a ride, and it's been a pleasure to share the first half of 2023 with you and build something that we are super proud of, that I am a user and a customer of myself. And it is truly my pleasure to have successfully taken you through the Cause of a Kind startup studio. And I'm very hopeful and very positive of a bright future for the HouseCrunch experience. And, as always, I'd like to give you the final word before we kick it out here. And I open the floor to anything for you that you'd like the audience to know, that you'd like us to know, that you'd like the family to know.
I mean, just go to housecrunch.com, check it out. And if you're in the market as a buyer, I mean, look around. It's a simple, easy platform to use. Just type in an address, the property will pop up, and make some inputs. So,
Karl, it's been a pleasure. I will see you, as they say, on the ether out there.
All right.
And you keep in close contact. And thanks for being on an episode with us.
All right. Good talking. Thanks.